I still opened up.
I'm going to get these things right.
From last week.
So, welcome to the public. Jareth and Bruce, thank you for attending. And Zan, I saw Zan. And Jenny. Looking very elegant over there. Welcome. And everyone else was here this morning. So, we are going to commence our formal meeting. Are there any apologies? There is one to our formal meeting. There, Joanelle she's here now. She was here, I saw her. So it's Liz. An apology from Liz Munro. Okay, we have someone to move to accept the apologies, please.
I'll move.
I'll second.
Mover and second, all those in favour, thank you.
Mate.
Can I just make a note, Chair, that I'm going to be leaving at 4 p.m.
4 p.m.
3:30 for me. 3:30.
3:30. 4. Right. Right. We're going to lose a quorum. As soon as we lose a quorum, the meeting's over. So we're going to aim for 4.
If that's the case, Chair, I think you should take the most important item first up. Near the rest of it.
I think that's right. Just want to make sure that we've got everyone here. We've got 75% quorum, haven't we? Yep.
Yes.
We do. And
There's only one item.
So the other thing is, don't we have to have an offset? So we've got Liz is away, so don't we have to have an offset on council?
No,
No.
No?
no.
Not for only going
Only-
around.
It's only appointed.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
It has to be equal numbers of appointed tangata whenua reps to councillors. It's not at any given meeting.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, no, I didn't give them in. Right. Do we have any notices?
Yes, I've got one.
Yeah.
Just to advise you all that the Ministry for Environment are doing essentially a roadshow around the country to bring forward the essential freshwater proposals, the MPS on highly productive land and urban development. They will be in Napier for a regional hui, Wairoa for a regional hui on the 24th of September. That's for iwi, and that's from 10:30 to 1:30, but the venue's still to be confirmed. They'll be in Napier on the 24th of September for a public meeting. That's 5:30 to 7:30 at East Pier. There is no primary sector meeting being held in the Hawke's Bay, so we would suggest that if people are wanting to attend, that they go to that meeting at East Pier. And then there is a Napier hui on the 25th of September for iwi, and that is from 1 till 4 again at East Pier. All of those details can be found on the Ministry's website as well.
Are you able to email that to us?
Bang it in your diary. Okay, thank you very much. Right, and no conflict of interests. Hundreds, but they're already declared. Confirmation of the previous minutes, which I don't have in front of me. Don't need it.
So it wasn't a formal meeting because we didn't have quorum, but we did.
We'd have minutes for the
we had
meeting before that.
minutes.
So we're going back to the 3rd of July.
Happy to move, Chair.
Move. Do we have seconder? Seconder Fenton. Thank you very much. All those in favour?
Aye.
That's our move. Accepted. Thank you very much. Follow-ups from the previous meeting. James, were you taking those or somebody else?
Happy to answer questions in relation to any of them. They should all be self-explanatory.
Any questions? I thought, just as a comment, but the historical rendition of the wetland was on page 6. I thought was particularly interesting, and that is something. Is that something that the Regional Planning Committee is going to have to make a ruling on eventually?
Look, I think the matter in terms of the definition of wetland within the Regional Resource Management Plan has been resolved through the
It has, this is specific to
settlement.
Pokawa.
So I think the short answer to that is no. So the policy now applies, and effectively Pokawa is exempt from that. But it will be dealt with during the consenting processes of the scheme, which is, as it notes here, is due in 2023.
Are you listening, Mr. Moore? You actually have a conflict of interest in that? What do you want me to declare it? I want you to be quiet.
Thank you.
We're still taking comments on follow-ups?
Sorry, yes?
Perhaps directed best to James. James, just item 7 about the annual plan. On page... Must be page 8. We've got Hawke's Bay Regional Council Annual Plan, Tangata Whenua Engagement Project 874.
Yes.
We've got project expenditure, $750,000.
Correct.
What is that?
That's Petty and his 2 staff in the Māori Partnerships Group. It's the funding for the independent advisors to the Regional Planning Committee Tangata Whenua reps. It's the remuneration for the Tangata Whenua reps and the Māori Standing Committee members. And also there is some discretionary budget in there which has been applied to the preparation of iwi management plans and the like.
So it doesn't include plan-specific reports that might be generated by iwi or contracted by
No,
council
they're
to
typically
iwi.
found in 192, which is the $1.669 million, which is the budget for Kerry's strategy and planning team. And so that includes a consultancy budget, which will typically involve the procurement of external advice on a range of matters, including those related to Tangata Whenua. Although from time to time, in terms of managing budgets, Petty's discretionary budget might be applied to the extent that it can be if the resource requirements are such, but it's a very modest budget relative to our overall planning consultancy budget.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just going back to the minutes, there was apologies from Councillor Wilson at that meeting. So
We need another seconder.
Second, so I'll second it.
Thank you, Toya, for stepping into the breach there. You weren't there, Pen, you couldn't, so you can't really second the minutes.
Try to pull a fast signal.
No,
Nice try though,
Toya
Chairman.
has. Oh, yeah. Buddy, those viral guys, they're tryers, these viral guys.
Election time.
Okay. Do we have any other issues on the follow-ups? Okay, we'll have someone to move the follow-ups, please. Tanya and Peter second. All those in favour? Aye, thank you very much. Call for minor items not on the agenda. Do we have any? Pretty busy agenda as it is.
Just in future, are we going to have a look at the clean air policy? Given we have got a high incidence of cancer in our area, and a lot of that I would assume is from orchard spray and other things. Do we need to look at that policy?
So a review of the Regional Resource Management Plan's air quality policies and rules is programmed in. We are currently awaiting, and I believe there's an announcement due next month, I think it is, from the Ministry for the Environment on a potential review and upgrade of the National Environmental Standard on air quality. That review will then flow into changes that we will then need to make. So there's a choice that lies ahead for this committee in the next triennium as to whether or not we press on with our own review ahead of that national direction being clarified. Although I think the National Environmental Standard is programmed for upgrade within the next 12 months, so it's probably not a long wait. That's our sense. Yeah.
Thank you.
So you were thinking that we will look at that in the next year?
We'll certainly look at the next triennium. The national standard is likely to be upgraded in the next year. May bring in, for example, PM 2.5 and some standards around that, and then we'll need to reflect that through.
Thank
The
you.
only reason I raised it, I think that that MFE delegation that's coming through, I think that might be one of your topics.
I think they are covering the review of the NES, which is programmed.
Any other business? Oh, Tora got his out. They didn't actually wait.
Saves time.
Okay, no other business then. Now, Rick, your proposal that we be selective in how we go through this, I would have thought that the next item, 6, is the most important.
Exactly.
Now to change the agenda. Okay, everyone, then we are on decision-making items. Number 6, proposed tax change. 9, adoption for notification. Had a lot of discussion on this, and I think we just go. We all understand it. I think we just go straight into to questions. What are they?
Can I just ask a question of clarification from a process perspective? Tangata Whenua have a amended resolution we'd like to put, and do we need to put that after the recommended resolution, or can we put that straight to the committee for consideration to cut to the chase?
I think what I'd like to do, there'll be other people will have questions to the plan. So let's just get all the questions out, and then we'll take your one, eh?
Chair, can I suggest it would be helpful if we had notice of the motion so that there could be question and discussion in relation to it before it gets taken to debate?
Yeah, so I just don't want to get us confused around, what motion's being put. So it is being printed.
Right.
So my question was just about the process of when resolutions are put. Do we have to put what's recommended, or can Tangata Whenua put their alternative for us to consider first?
I just think can I
Just
respond?
asking.
I just think it would be helpful if the resolution was emailed to the secretary of the committee, so she can then put it up.
Yeah,
And I just think from a point of view of process, it would be, from my perspective, be better if we had the recommendation up, and then it'd be as an amendment. We then vote on the amendment. If the amendment's carried, then it becomes a substantive motion, then we carry on. If the amendment's lost, well, then we carry on with a substantive motion. I just think that's what we normally do, and it's very clear to everybody. No confusion then, is there?
So you're saying put the amended one up first?
No, the opposite. The opposite. To put up what the recommendation is, and then if you're seeking to amend it, do the amendment. Then we have the debate around that. I would say, given that we've been up and down this many times, I think it would be best, from my perspective, just put the resolutions on the deck and let's get at it.
Peter, then Fenton, then Neil.
Yeah, Chair, I'm interested in some discussion on the limit which was touched on, or whether there's going to be a limit, which was touched on earlier today. The recommendation that came from the tank process was a limit of 90 million cubic metres. The plan change that's in front of us has no limit.
Yes, it does.
Or, sorry, to rephrase Neil's comment, the limit is the actual and reasonable review of the current consents, and then there's a proposal from the Tangata Whenua members, and I'm not clear whether it's actually from you, whether you endorsed it yesterday, or whether it's from the advisory that you received yesterday, but one or the other, that it should be 80 million. And given that the plan change, in the way it's phrased, and nobody has challenged this at all, is that all of the consents will be reviewed on an actual and reasonable basis, and it's not going to be relevant whether it's 80 or 90 or 70 or 200. Why is the suggestion that we make it 80? I don't understand this, and somebody needs to explain it.
Well, isn't that a process, isn't that better a discussion we have when we have the resolutions up on the deck and we can then have a discussion about
At that point, we're in debate.
Well, I just think we should suspend the
We-
rules.
I'm proposing that we have some discussion about this, and then we're armed with the information about this at the point when we get to the debate.
Well, what's the difference between discussion and debate?
That's what we normally do, Rick.
I'm just
We
suggesting
normally
the
do
chair,
that.
I'm just suggesting the chair, he lets all the resolutions on the deck so we can see them, and we then have a discussion so we're clear about that, not just a one-on-one, and then at the point of it, then come to how we do the voting.
All the resolutions, Rick.
Because otherwise we don't know. I would like to see the resolution. I'm not going to see
No,
debates on it.
he's into the detail of what's in this plan, especially what Tangata Whenua are recommending.
Let's see
And
what
I
the
think
recommend-
Can I just suggest, Chair, that what Peter has said is that the Tangata Whenua received advice yesterday which suggested a limit of 80 million cubes. However, we have no idea what the outcome of that discussion was, and we'll be informed by the proposed resolution that's put up there. So until we actually know that, we're talking about supposition.
Exactly my point. I agree with you.
Chair, it's not clear that the resolution which has been tabled, I haven't seen it, relates to 80 million cubic metres at all. But clearly, the quantitative limits around abstraction from groundwater was a substantial issue canvassed in this paper, and perhaps as the first item for this discussion, we can answer some questions in relation to that limit.
I have other questions that are in this paper, and I'm sure other people will have, that's actually in the document.
Sure. Chair, all I'm suggesting is in terms of sequentially going through all of those issues, we could start with the quantitative limit as the first major item in the paper that's been
I tend to
provided.
agree with that. Neil, have you got a thought on that, or?
Well,
Have a thought.
I think you're jumping the gun. We don't know if anyone's got any issue with it at all. It's,
We don't.
we don't know that yet.
Well, shall I just confirm it?
We do.
Should we ask the Tangata Whenua what they say?
Yeah, please. Right.
We read it this morning.
Yeah, I know. So the proposal is that it be a numerical limit
Okay.
of 80.
Right, that's fine. Right. Can I, Mr. Chair, you've asked for questions and I've got questions.
Yeah, I do think, we'll just hold, Peter, and let's just get through the questions in the plan that people have, because I certainly have some. Just questions.
Well, I've got a question.
Yeah, would you please?
Can I have an answer to this, please? We've got a number of amendments. For example, paragraph 53 and paragraph 78, 78, 79. Now, have those amendments which are being promoted in this paper included already in the draft, or are they to be inserted?
They're included in the draft.
Currently included in the draft.
Yes.
And basically have been iterated and seen as being something we could sign off without too much issue. Is that right?
I'm not sure about the without too much issue, but that you could sign off on.
The intent of the cover paper was to draw the committee's attention to those matters which have subsequently been updated in the version that is attached, the latest version of the plan change.
That was my only question, Mr. Chair. You may proceed.
Thank you. Well, why don't we just kick off with a few of my questions. So, page 32, 34B, E crossed out. And it was, E said, allow site-to-site transfer or allocation of water, basically.
So this is
Mr. Chair, where are we?
We're in 30.
I'm in the document.
So the plan change,
Plan change.
page 32 of the plan change.
34BC, allow site-to-site transfer of allocated water provided they do not result in increased water use. Now, that was agreed with by Tank, and it's been crossed out,
It's been moved.
been moved.
It's been moved, and it's
It's
been
somewhere else.
Yeah, it's somewhere else. It's
Okay,
in-
no, I take your word for it, it's been moved. Done, fine. Okay, move over the page. 36, that's page 33, 36B. I thought that we were consult on the design and management of the stream flow enhancement regime. So I thought we were, consult who? I thought we were the ones that would make that decision.
So that any stream flow maintenance and habitat enhancement scheme is subject to resource consent requirements. And they would go through the proper procedural process for notification and consultation with affected parties.
Are we still in there then?
Yeah.
I think the council has a very strong role to play in helping understand what's feasible using our groundwater model. So we would inform groups of water permit holders in terms of what their options are. So yes, we would have a role.
Okay.
According to schedule.
It's basically, so this will be a collaborative, there could be lots of people involved. It could be city council, there could be local farmers, iwi, hapu, everybody.
I think that, Chair, goes to the last clause in that section, which is the council will enable permit holders to progressively and collectively, through water user collectives, develop and implement flow maintenance and habitat enhancement schemes as permits are replaced or reviewed. So that certainly does place an onus on the council to work with those water users to develop those mitigation mechanisms.
It's a big process. Okay, I want to go to page 43 actually. It's part of that 54 though. So it says here in number C3, and this is where Tangata Whenua get their share of the of water allocation. The contribution to the fund is proportional to the amount of the reserve water being taken and any commercial return resulting from that application. What do we mean by commercial return?
So any economic value that's derived from the use of that water.
Do you mean Tangata Whenua have the right to the economic use of that water, or do they have the right to tax somebody else using that water?
Exactly.
Not exactly. The idea is that there is some water available to enhance Māori outcomes, and that there's a specified amount for that. It can be used by some third party to generate economic well-being or
Orchard, an apple?
something.
Yeah.
And if they are using or accessing some of that reserved amount, then the equivalent economic value would go into the trust that we imagine could be set up to manage that.
Whose idea was that?
It was trying to operationalise the idea that we could allocate high flow water to improve Māori well-being.
I get that. That came from Zan. That was Zan's idea, and he's here today.
So
and I get that, and I agree with that. But if you take it to this extra point here, and I don't want to answer my own questions, it says that to a commercial level, it gets a little bit dicey. That's all I'm saying. And actually, on the one up here, it said the council will manage in consultation with Mana Whenua. That'll be, how are you going to find out who they are?
It would depend on where the
Tai Whenua, or is that the Marae?
activity is, the relevant iwi authorities that are going to have an interest.
Yeah.
It's a very challenging and complex area of...
Very challenging.
And absolutely at the bleeding edge of RMA policy development nationally. I think, and this is obviously a broader theme for today's discussion, is that we have a proposal. It's likely to have some challenges and implications with respect to implementation. The proposal would go through the submission and commissioner process in order to test the feasibility of all of this and the views of a range of stakeholders. So at this stage, it is a proposal.
Mr. Chairman, could you have the recommendation up on the board again, please?
So the recommendation, I'm just going through questioning. There's no, I'm just actually asking.
I know, but that's got no significance to anything.
Tori, you have a question?
Yeah,
A question, not a
trying to
statement?
understand your perspective. Do you think that Māori should not be able to have a commercial gain from
Absolutely.
water like everyone else seems to?
No, I need to answer that because it's got racist overtones. Zan had that idea to give 20% of the extra water to Māoris, and I'm really happy with that.
Well, it's not his to give.
Well, that was his
We've got
recommendation.
full and exclusive possession of all our tonga.
Well, actually, it's
We
got-
have given it to you. You're not giving it to us.
Well, it belongs to God, actually. But anyway, that was it, and this is taking another level,
What do the
another
atheists
step.
think about that?
What's that?
What do the atheists say about that?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
to get some little logic into the recommendation, shouldn't it be that 1.2 agrees the amendments described in the reports being tabled items 1, 2, 3, 4, and then choose either 5A or 5B, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. Otherwise we've got nothing to talk about.
We're still asking questions.
No, he's right though.
No, he's not right. We're asking questions. People, I haven't asked any questions on this, but now I've spent the time and I've read it, and I'm not happy with some of the issues in here, and I'm asking questions on it. Has anyone else got any questions before we go to the resolutions? Yes, Peter does. A question.
Yes, I have two questions. The first one is in relation to page 3641A, General Water Allocation Policies, and this is to do with telemetry. And I
Plan,
can...
Peter, sorry.
Sorry?
Are you in the plan?
Yes, I'm in the plan. So it's 41A. So it's proposed that there will not be telemetry required for takes that are below 5 litres a second. And I can recall some discussion about this, and I thought that that number had been moved downwards to 3 or something. Is my memory incorrect?
Yeah, it's always been 5 as the...
I know it is currently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know of any 3.
Any proposal to change it? Okay, so it'll remain at 5 on the basis of this. Okay, that was my first question. The second one is in our agenda papers, page 17, table 1, list of issues and amendments number 3, which is the reallocation of water based on actual and reasonable assessment. I was given to understand that there would be a review of all consents, but this suggests, if I've read it correctly, that there would not be a review of the current community consents for Hastings and Napier.
They would all be reviewed.
Yeah.
All of the relevant consents, if they're not expiring in the next 10 years, we would bring them in and review them, and that would include the territorials. But what doesn't apply is the actual and reasonable component of the analysis.
So does that imply that the current consents will not change?
No, it doesn't imply that at all. In fact, Napier City would have to provide information around their projected water use within the HPUD's boundary.
Yep.
And the consent possibly would come down to reflect that as well.
Okay, so what you're telling us is it's quite conceivable under this test that the current consents for both Hastings and Napier may be reduced.
I think Hastings has already gone through a process that has reduced their allocations already, but Napier's yet to go through that analysis.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions on the plan change?
Chair, so can I just bring us back to the suggestion around 80 million cubic metres, I think.
Discussion on that, I think that's a good idea.
Yes, so I think it would be helpful to have some commentary from staff, and given that Mr Brough is a contractor of council and is the originator of the advice that it should be set at 80, I suggest that if the committee's willing, we invite him to come and provide his rationale for that number.
Happy to do that. Mr Brough, the floor is yours. And our people, yeah. $80 rather than nothing.
Or 90.
Or 90.
Is that the question? 80 rather than nothing?
80, 90, or...
That's why 80.
Why 80?
Why 80? Okay, so my understanding of reading the technical reports was that the original interim 90 million cubic metres number that was in tank plan change version 6 or 7, one of the two, was put there because it was the best estimate of actual use from the 2012 and 2013 driest year. Is that correct? Okay. And that number, as I understand, came from a series of models
And actuals.
and actual data where you had actual data from telemetry and metering.
That's right.
So at best, it was a estimate from a model plus a little bit of verified data.
Exactly.
In discussions with Tangata Whenua over the past, I think since June 2018, we had that very informative hui in the PwC building where the rationale for the non-consensus items plus tank plan change per se was provided by staff. Tangata Whenua have considered the interim 90 million cubic metres. They've also considered the various mitigation measures put forward by the tank group and expressed in the plan change. At that time, the stream flow enhancement scheme, so I think it was called, and what difference, if any, that would make to the values that were derived through the objectives, and I suspect it was objective 2 at that time, it could be 4, I forget, they've changed, in relation to tikanga and Mātauranga Māori, which were two aspects that were clearly woven into the streamflow enhancement scheme. Forgive the parlance, it's changed over time and I struggle to keep up. With those things in mind, the discussion was had as to whether or not the streamflow enhancement schemes, as they were back then, would actually have a meaningful effect on offsetting, using those words, I think that's what the plan said, offset/mitigate, the loss of value that was expressed quite clearly, as I understand, in reading some of the minutes from the tank working group, and also through the discussions that we'd had, myself and Ricky Ellison as independent technical advisors, and of course this is pre the period of pre-notification consultation where they were expressed more fully. As Mr Mackay pointed out, are now in Appendix 3 of the Section 32 report. So there's been quite a fulsome discussion about whether or not the interim limit of 90 might be appropriate insofar as it offsets, using those planning terms, or mitigates those particular values. You will recall back, I suspect in July of this year, we had a conversation I suspect it was a workshop setting, James, I might be wrong, it could be an RPC hui, where we provided our advice to Tangata Whenua reps, and the advice was provided to councillors in a tabulose format, where we had expressed some concern with whether or not those aspirations of Tangata Whenua would be achieved through streamflow enhancement. It turns out, with subsequent amendments, that they wouldn't be. The terms tikanga and Mātauranga Māori were removed. It became a streamflow maintenance scheme. So then the question therefore became what then, if anything, in the plan actually provided for Te Mano Te Wai, the other values that were expressed by Tangata Whenua in the values diagram. And then once that discussion was had, getting back to the allocation limit in itself, Tangata Whenua expressed a view that we need to be precautionary because the science, as it became more clear in our understanding of it, was that it wasn't so clear, and that perhaps we weren't quite sure whether or not we had a sustainable limit, and we weren't quite sure whether 90 million cubic metres would actually achieve those things. Combined with Tangata Whenua's reservations around streamflow maintenance / enhancement and what that would do, and the net result of those discussions being that we thought the best we could possibly do, given Tangata Whenua views were those mitigation measures probably weren't going to be that effective in terms of their views and should be short-term and temporary, was to look at a lesser number. The number we looked at was 80. That had been discussed in the RPC in August. We had several working groups and several meetings on that number. It wasn't just Tangata Whenua, as I understand, that also mooted a lesser number, be discussed by council staff. So this is not just a Tangata Whenua view, albeit at this time, and there is recommendations which have been amended, it is. But that is the underlying story, whakaaro, of why the number 80 was chosen.
Thank you, Billy. Questions? I've got heaps. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just keep it to a question?
Oh, always, Mr Chair.
I know.
I wonder if staff can just remind us the rationale for moving away from, or two questions, reliability of a number, and two, the reasons to adopt or to recommend in the draft that there be an alternative narrative limit. Can you explain the rationale for moving down the road that we've gone?
Right. I think Billy has articulated quite well the uncertainty around whether it should be 90 or 80, and that we are, with our cumulative impact of groundwater takes, having an adverse effect on lowland streams through stream depletion. We don't yet know what actual and reasonable will deliver, and until we know that, we don't know what has been allocated, and we can't then assess the costs of changes to those allocations. So as an alternative, the non-numerical approach has been suggested, in that it provides quite a clear limit to how much water is available in the Heretaunga Plains. That is, it is the actual and reasonable amount of the current water permit holders, and that it be subject to a future review. It's supported by the suggestion for a prohibited activity, so that we are quite clearly saying in the plan there is no more water available. There is a resource limit set in place. The other thing.
Can you just address the issue as to the reliability of a number such as 90, 80 or 70?
Yeah.
Well, obviously that's not now recommended in the draft plan. Why did you go down that road? What was it about 90 or 80 that was not attractive to be put into the plan?
So 80 was not something that staff developed. That was something that came out of conversations with
All right, 90.
So in terms of the 90, that was the best estimate for use in the 2012-13.
I get that, but why did you not want it? Is it a reliable number? What was the reason for saying let's not use 90?
It was an indicative number for the amount being used. It has become an issue that we were looking for alternatives to avoid it becoming an issue. What is the correct number? When in actual fact what we needed to do was set a limit to allocation in the groundwater in the aquifer. So that's the important parts of the plan are the rules and the schedules which limit the amount that's now available.
Get that part. I'm still uncertain as to why 90 was not a good number.
Indicative.
It's an indicative number. It's still an okay sort of number, but to avoid even further debate about what a good number is or isn't, which has subsequently happened, we're looking at an alternative approach.
Councillor, I think one of the challenges of moving away from that number, which has been described as a best guess of that usage in the 2012-13 drought, moving away from that, the problem with that is that we don't know what the actual level of use is.
So it's not a reliable number.
That's right.
Thank you. That's all I needed to hear. It's not a
Peter,
reliable number.
your question, Peter.
Yeah, it's pretty much been covered in the discussion.
Benton.
Thank you, Chair. So say we pick a number.
No, Rick, then you take.
90 might be too much, 80 might be enough, might be 100 or 110, who knows? I mean, once a number has been set, what is the reality of that? Does it cage the discussion into a point where we should be looking at a whole range of other factors, or what's the unintended consequence of actually establishing a number?
It doesn't have any effect in the term of the plan, because the existing consents are going to be reviewed and actual and reasonable process followed. So, and we have a proposal for a prohibited activity. So there is actually no room for new entrants into the current allocation amount. But what it might do at the time the plan is then reviewed, it becomes a starting point for conversations around what the most appropriate allocation limit is. And so you're starting your conversation from either 80 or 90, when really you should be starting your conversation around what is the current allocated amount, what is it that we need to allocate in order to provide for objectives, and what is the cost of any change to that package. That's the conversation that needs to be had once we've reviewed all of the consents.
So the practical effect, Sorry, Chair, I'll just add, the practical effect of adopting 80 at this point would be twofold. One would be raising expectations for where the management regime might seek to get to at the next point of review. But the other practical effect I would suggest of having 80 as a number, 90 is probably, if it was in there, broadly justifiable as being an indicative estimate of what the effect of the rollover on actual and reasonable will achieve. If we go with 80, I would expect during the submissions and hearings processes that to be tested. And the issue we would have with that is that we can't quantify the costs and benefits of going to 80 because we don't actually know with certainty what the current level is. And so it's likely to come under scrutiny which might not withstand that scrutiny during the next stage of the process.
It's kind of where I want to start my question with. With these things, you have to plan for the best, but assume that you're going to hit the worst. So let's challenge this, and we wind up in, say, the Environment Court. And the court says to this council on its behalf, well, you tell us how you got to the number 80, a very precise number of everything. And what they would expect is a series of facts, then some analysis, which led you inescapably to a conclusion. What they would require. They wouldn't expect, well, we liked it because it was less than the 90. That's basically what I've heard. So what are the facts to be relied upon? What's the analysis? And what leads you inescapably to the conclusion that 80 is the number which you can justify from any scrutiny at all?
This question directed at me?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Okay. The first thing I would say is despite what Simpson Grierson have said in draft, from a planning perspective, do not think that having a no numerical limit is defensible under the NPSFM. I would point the committee to Objective B2, which requires the council, so it's a mandatory consideration, to avoid future over-allocation and to reduce where you have it over-allocation. With no numerical limit, you do not know if you're over-allocated or not, despite the fact that the council for Karo, for the last 2 years that I've been involved, demonstrates that you actually are over-allocated. So are you or aren't you? And how do you know?
But you're asking a question. I've asked you a question. I'm looking for an answer. I'm trying to be difficult with you. But what I said to you is we put a number up. It's very precise. We're then going to have to identify the facts that are to be relied upon, the analysis, and the logic chain that leads you to that particular figure. That's what I'm asking.
And I appreciate the difficulty, and I should attempt to answer that. I would direct the committee to the hydrological report, which suggests that after the actual reasonable use test has been completed, you have 78.1, I think, or 78.2 million cubic metres of water, litres rather, of water left. 78.3, I think, is the answer.
78.1.
78.1, my apologies.
78.5, in and out.
So after you have gone through the ramifications of the policy framework, which talks to reducing a no numerical limit down to a number that we think is 78.1, we think, but we don't know. I'll acknowledge that because we are in a period of uncertainty. Then using my best planning knowledge, I would choose a precautionary approach that was much closer to that number than to 90. Albeit at the time we had this discussion, there was no prohibited activity status, which is something which is new. And we didn't have an expressed grandparenting regime being applied through policy, which we currently do have with the prohibited activity status. That's the rationale I would use from a planning perspective. And it's a pity Mr. Mackay is not here to answer that question, because I think he might have a view as well, and it might be different to mine.
Did I answer your question?
The actual usage.
Well, to start by, I haven't saw a clock. The point is, anyway, it's a fair start to it, but leave it.
Chair, can I just address this question of over-allocation? Because I think it's important that the committee understands that with respect to water quality and the impacts of quantum of abstraction from the aquifer and its effect on lowland streams and therefore the quality and ecological health of those lowland streams, is that there is not a binary number or a binary point at which you've got over-allocation or not. With respect to the total volume of replenishment of the aquifer, there is a point numerically that you could reach, assuming you have perfect information, at which you know that you are in permanent decline because you are taking more than the rate of replenishment, which is a number at which you could say we are over-allocated. The best science available to the tank group and the tank process has been that we're not at that point, so we're not in a perpetual mining of the resource, so we're not over-allocated in that respect. However, what we do have is a situation where we've got degradation of lowland streams as a consequence of depressurisation of the stream-fed contribution from the aquifer. The extent of that's acceptable or unacceptable is more of a balance and a broad set of judgments, and so there's not a number you can magically come up with and say that in terms of managing that effect you're either over-allocated or you're not. So I just wanted to point out that point of clarification.
Okay, James, thanks for the opinion. Naya doesn't agree with it, but no.
Technical reports don't agree with that.
We're going to go. Wait a minute. We're going to go Tanya.
Sorry, through you, Chair. Tanya, sorry, I don't have the document in front of me, but I do believe it mentions within that table that it is based on a model and it is an estimated number.
Yeah, like 90.
So, and I think that goes
80
back to
like
Councillor
90.
Curtin's
They're
point
both
of the
estimates.
reliability of the figure.
I understand.
So Tanya, I just want to go through this. Go you, Paul, Toto, and then Peter. In that order. Okay.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions to staff first of all. With the non-numerical limit that's being proposed, actual and reasonable, whatever total figure that comes up with over however many years we find out what that information reveals in terms of a number, how is that actual and reasonable numerical limit relate to what the aquifer can sustain?
So, as James just pointed out, we know that at that level, the modelled amount at 90, the aquifer is at a state of equilibrium. It's not being mined. We just have to stop allowing more abstraction to happen. But that amount also has a cumulative stream depletion effect, and it's the extent to which we manage that stream depletion effect that is at issue. Do we reduce the allocations to manage that stream depletion effect, or do we look for some mitigation measure? And looking at the various management options, we landed on the stream flow maintenance as a way of managing that impact on those lowland streams.
So just from my understanding, and I'm looking at the summary, executive summary of the Hiratonga Aquifer Groundwater Model Report, page 17, you probably don't have it in front of you, but it talks about inflows and outflows for the Hiratonga Aquifer system. And in terms of inflows, there's a number of 78.5, and in terms of outflows, there's 78.1. It would tell me that the aquifer is stable at 80. Is that incorrect?
We've got our hydrologist in the
Jeff
background.
over here.
Jeff, can you answer that question for us?
The inflow of 78 is from rainfall recharge. There's also, I think, 180 or 190 million cubic metres from river recharge. So the total is roughly 250 million. Abstraction is 78, so it's not exceeding the recharge by any means.
So I'm looking at the figures here. It says, thank you for pointing that out, total inflows are 267.1, total outflow 267.1.
Yeah, so total outflow includes the sea discharge as well and discharge to the streams.
Understood, but that's the balance, isn't it?
Essentially all that says is that all the water is going into the system, and it's 267 million cubes per annum. So the total level of abstraction is well within that total volume coming in and out.
But it's, okay. It says groundwater pumping is 78.1.
Correct. That's on average. The 90 relates to a very, very dry year.
Understood.
Paul.
Thank you, Chair. The decision to stop any further consents or applications for take from the aquifer are because it's recognised that it's in a state of equilibrium and that if we take any more out, then it would be in a state of decline and would be mining it essentially, isn't it?
The levels would start to decline.
Okay.
So also a concern about that incredible paper overhang of allocation.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So at the moment, our best guess is that the maximum, or the take is the maximum take in a dry year, which is the 90 million cubes, right? What happens if, in the event that we're going through actual reasonable use and the sum comes to something like 110 or 120 million cubes?
So that's the point at which there needs to be further analysis about whether or not that is an appropriate allocation limit for the values of the water bodies, and it also would require some analysis around the social, cultural, economic costs of reducing that 110 further. And then how would you get it to reduce further? Would there be a pro rata cost, or would you choose some end uses that you preferred? There would be an analysis at that point.
So what would necessarily be so wrong is to put a volume limit, whether it's 80 or 90 or whatever, on in the plan, and that if the actual and reasonable use came close to breaching that total, that we revisit it then. So take it the other way around. So because what you're telling me is that if we go through the actual reasonable use and add them all up in 10 years' time and find that it comes to 120, then we'll revisit it then. Well, what's so wrong then in turning it around and saying let's put a limit, a value limit in there, and if we come close to reaching that as we're summing everything up, we go, oops, we better revisit what's actually going on.
I think the answer, because it's an arbitrary number, and review of the overall allocation is required by the policy at the completion of the reconsenting processes.
So the only argument against putting a number in is because it's arbitrary.
Because it's arbitrary, yeah. And 90 probably has the strongest evidential base in so much as it's a best guess to support what Action and Reasonable is likely to come out with. But there's a high degree of uncertainty about that for all the reasons we know.
No, Tora.
Oh, yeah. So,
Got?
no, so my question is, are we operating on a management regime of the elusive theory, or what? Because, this tank process has been going for quite a while, and no one seems to be able to give us a number in terms of what is actually being utilised. So I'm a simpleton, and say, in good management, they say if it's not measured, it's not managed. So why don't we have the answers? 'Cause how can we manage if we don't measure what's going on?
So, Chair, if I could respond to that. Look, it's enormously frustrating for everybody involved that we don't have perfect information or even very strong information in a number of areas, and that is the reality of the resource management challenge we have with this highly complex water system. The policy sets us up in the future for having much better information through the consent review process. So I think we acknowledge readily the fact that we don't have complete information about existing use, and until we have brought in each and every consent and we've run IRRCalc calculations with landowners, we've understood the land use, and there have been tests run over each and every consent, and we're talking thousands and thousands of those, which is going to take years and years and millions of dollars of both the community's money and the council's money. Until we've done that, we won't know with any definition exactly how much water is required for existing uses and how much is currently being used. At the same time, we're also going to have to continue the assessment of effects and get a better understanding of how the various policies and mitigations set out in the plan will deliver improved freshwater outcomes. So all of this goes to the fact that this is an adaptive management game that we're in. We are always going to have information deficits and imperfections, and therefore we have to rely on the best available broad judgment, and we have to manage this on an ongoing basis with continual evaluation and review, and a continued investment by this council and the ratepayer in scientific monitoring, as well as consent holders having to invest in that as well. So it's just a reality of the environment we're in, and it is frustrating for those that want certainty around what's the current take, what's the current effect, what's the right number. We're never going to be in that position fully, certainly not in the short term.
So you're saying it's a budgetary matter?
No, I'm saying that right across resource management in New Zealand, we have pervasive information deficits, and that arguably may result to relatively permissive resource management regimes that haven't invested in enough science and monitoring as we would ideally like to meet today's standard of environmental management. And that's not, unfortunately, something you can whip up just by allocating, $1 million here or there. You require longitudinal data. This is a long game.
But just to answer briefly another way back, the problem is, Toru, what we should have done is every time someone put a hole in the ground to take water, they should have had a monitor on it and given us the data. But we didn't do that because people thought there was endless water. So we can't retrospectively go and get all the data, so there's a big hot gap in it. But we're doing that now, and in the future we'll have better data, and as time goes on we'll get better and better data. But at the moment we've got a legacy issue of just being slack about how we went about our job. Can't fix it.
Peter, you're on.
So a very short comment about the data, because as everyone now knows, the numbers that we've got are estimates. They're not exact, and they'll probably never be exact. And one of the reasons why they're estimates is because the requirement to put telemetry on the wells, and don't forget there are 2,000 wells around the Hiratonga Plains, and so it's a hell of a big job to try and get monitoring data on all of those wells and collect that data and analyse it. And you can't just do it in 1 year. You need to do it over several years before you've got any sort of reliable numbers to work on. So that doesn't exist today, but in 10 years' time, it will exist. So we'll have much better and much more reliable data once we've gone through this action on reasonable regime of reallocating the consents. To go through this exercise in 10 years' time. That wasn't the reason why I wanted to make a comment, Chair. It was because I've sat at 2 meetings now and I've heard people say that this 78.1 million cubic metres is all you can take out of the aquifer, but that's not right, because Jeff has just told us the amount of water that goes in and out of this aquifer every year is more like 270 million, and it's all got to come, it all goes in and it's all got to get back out. So whether it gets out through pumping or through the springs or through going out to sea, it's all got to get out, and it's just a question of which way it gets out. So if the pumping was 90 million rather than the 78, it means that there'd be less going out to sea, presumably, and it means that there might be a little bit less water in the springs. So the real issue in my mind is, if we allocate, or we find that we've allocated and we're actually using a greater number, what are we going to do about the offsetting? And it seems to me that that's the really critical thing that nobody's even talked about during the course of this meeting.
Because we're only asking questions.
Mr. Chairman.
No, but thank you, Peter. That was excellent.
Excellent, but I agree with you, Peter.
Alan?
Mr. Chairman, I'm just hoping that perhaps we can start making better progress. Well, we've been making progress, but make more definite progress, and accordingly I'd like to move the motion which was up on the screen, but incorporating the table listing by numbers, and can we get that up, Emily?
There's recommendations. You're going straight to the recommendations.
I'm moving the recommendation, but I believe it should incorporate the amendment table,
So
amendment tables 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'll take a punt on 5B.
Where are they? Hang on. What page are they? What pages?
Pages of the agenda, 17, 18. 5B, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. Would anyone prepared to second that?
Which table? That's table 1.
Issues and amendments.
Oh, he's putting it.
He's put them on.
So he's on the body of 80 million.
Just for clarity, Chair, so that's the recommendations plus the table, but rather than either A or B, we're going with 5B. And that table will be included in the recommendation.
Table should be in there, otherwise, when, for the record, there's nothing actually to come back to. And I've moved 5B, which is no specific allocation limit. But I've also been persuaded that to go with that, there should be 6 prohibited activity, which wasn't where I was at this morning.
So,
But I
Chair,
haven't got a seconder, so seconded.
Chair, just for completion, can I just have clarified from the member that you mean all of the table, including 1 to 10 in the table, but 5B as opposed to 5A? Is that correct?
Yes.
Can I just also clarify, there are actually some decision items in paragraph 6 and 78 and 79. Paragraph 6 is essentially encompassing all of those additions that were made in the previous papers.
Where are they?
Including
On our
them?
recommendations here.
We're going to
But
be
they've been
careful
included,
about...
they've been incorporated into version 9.3, which is what we are referring to in the recommendations, just so you're aware that that's what's taken place.
That's my question.
Well, it should be noted in the resolution. We've got to be careful about resolutions. They can come back and bite you in the bum.
Exactly right. So you've got to move it on seconder. Can I suggest to you, Chair, that given the complexity of this, and that we've had a session of questions, the odd comment, that rather than have a formal debate the way that we've normally had, everybody gets one speech, and then that's your speaking rights. Given the seriousness of this, I think you should have a relatively informed discussion, and when you think the discussion's sort of run its course, get to the point of then, right, are we ready to make some decisions, go to decision making. I would like to have a pretty open debate.
On the list?
Decision making by consensus, Rick.
Well, yeah, certainly on the totality of
Totality, I just think we've gone backwards and forwards, up and down this paddock, backwards and across. We're pretty okay. I think we need to have a discussion, because whilst there are 3 options on the table, which are just anyway, 80, 90, and a non-numerical upper limit in words. The thing that we haven't got out of this conversation at all yet is, I think, a unified concern about preserving the quality of the aquifer. We're choosing different tools to do that and different mechanisms to do it. And I think it would be very helpful to have a conversation where you draw that out as well. I mean, Peter's view of it, the way he expressed it, I would sympathise but express it differently. I don't think there's really any differences here in the objective. It's just how we get there.
Well, let's remember that we'll have members leaving from 3 o'clock on.
Yeah, I get that.
Can I also put something else in there, Mr. Chair? Tangata Whenua do have a proposal.
Yes, that's right. Sorry, I should have come back to you.
Yeah, so we could go through this, but that's not a proposal that Tangata Whenua have discussed and concur with. We wonder if it might be more pragmatic to at least put forward the proposal that we're suggesting so that it can be considered. But
I agree with that. I think the Tangata Whenua should move their amendment. It should be on the deck, and we see the totality of it. Have a discussion.
Move in a second, so can it be moved as an amendment?
Yeah, now's the time. Moved and second, now's the time.
Right.
okay, thank you.
Put that on the table. We can see the totality of
So
it.
I'll move it as an amendment, and Api will second it.
Can I just ask you, I'm struggling to understand it. Can you just give us the basis of it?
Were we getting that on a piece of paper at some point?
Yeah, I've got it here. But can I just clarify? What Councillor Dick is trying to do is to actually specify, using the table, the exact nature of the amendments that are reflected in the 9.3, which is attached to our papers, as an attachment to our papers. Am I correct in understanding that? And what you were explaining, Kerry, is that the table narrates some of those changes as they've been the current subject of discussions with the subcommittee, but there are prior changes that were presented earlier to this committee which have been rolled over and are still shown as a markup in this current version 9.3. That's what we're saying? And so what Councillor Dick is proposing is actually a more clearer resolution, if you like, to be more specific about the nature of the changes. But it's actually, if assuming you're deciding no numerical limit, which I think was the only decision, is that right? That is reflected currently in 9.3. So am I correct in understanding that what Councillor Dick is proposing is not a substantive change at all to what the staff have recommended? He's just detailing it.
Exactly right.
Is that what we're trying to understand?
Yep.
Right.
I think that's
So-
right, Tanya. 1.2 would seek that whatever is agreed gets incorporated into 9.3. So I think all of those other amendments will be adequately picked up, and because they are reflected in 9.3.
They're already in there.
Yeah.
So for the benefit of some of the quizzical looks around the table, 9.3 in our papers is like a rolling version that has picked up all the changes prior and these most current ones. Does that make sense?
Except
That's what-
for 5B.
Well, it already provides for 5B as a presumption.
Yeah, it does.
It
In
already
the
provides for
plan.
5B.
Yes.
So it's consistent with the staff recommendations, and Councillor Dick is simply wanting to be more specific.
Yep.
Are we all clear?
Yep.
Okay. So, can I now table our proposed amendments?
Yep.
There's 3 pages, 2 sides here, with a bit of a statement from Councillor Whenua, who discussed the proposed recommendations.
Should be doing this.
Here is, if I can talk and walk. Yeah.
That's called multitasking.
Yeah, I can do that.
The first one that you that's in our paper.
Yes.
Which should be up there.
It's the black one, which is above, sitting above
It
this.
isn't the same as this.
2 pages.
2 pages.
I think she's just changed that now, based on what Councillor Dick was just saying. Is that right, Annalie? You've just amended this now?
1.2. Where's
Didn't
you
Alan move
It's coming
all of
round.
it?
should have split them, set them either way.
There would be far more.
In-
I know.
in-
It was so
Right, you were
jumbled
talking, I
up
didn't
all
know you
over
were
the
up there.
place.
This is good, we're getting somewhere now.
Did you wish
Get
to
the sharp
revert
end.
back to how it was, as it is in the paper?
I believe that the changes or the amendments need to be specifically referred to.
Noted.
Yeah, but I thought he'd moved the whole lot.
He did.
Oh,
And so I'm
not
concerned
just
about.
1.2, the
Yes.
whole, yeah. Okay. At the bottom there.
Yeah, thank you.
Go suggest next time we do a resolution like this, you give Councillor Dick the help. We'll have to haul you back from time to time to be a consultant on getting our resolutions right.
Yeah, I see.
Alan?
Well, someone needs to make sure that it's
Exactly
put
right.
together properly.
Too many millennials around this table, not enough grey hairs.
So what the reference to table A in here is what's called table 1 in the
No, table A on the back of that resolution. So may I just explain it? It's pretty brief. I know we're not in debate, but Tangata Whenua wanted to prepare a statement. So we've determined that the most pragmatic way forward for the draft PC9 is to notify the draft PC9 with the further changes we request in table A, which is attached. So I'll come to that in one moment. And the second part, which we will come to later, is that we proceed for a Schedule 1, Part 1 process. So the reasons for this approach are, although some concessions have been made, and I acknowledge staff for their efforts around the subcommittee, we still remain frustrated with this process, and also, like everyone around the table, frustrated with this process and also
I
the
could have written that
outcome.
myself.
Yeah, the outcome. So from our perspective, given this is really the second substantive plan change we're presented with, it's pretty frustrating and it's not what we envisaged we'd come to, really. So we think it's time to actually put the plan out and let the public debate its merits or otherwise. So we wanted to put on the record at the 3 that notifying this plan does not mean Tangata Whenua Group agree with its contents, likewise with some councillors, I'd imagine. In fact, we have expressed at many hui those provisions we are not happy with, and we refer you to submissions, presentations from Lyle and his team, and the advice received from our independent technical advisors, which you've received copies of. So, on the second page, you have a marked up version of the resolution, and on the back is Table A. So I'll just go to Table A for the moment.
Some of us haven't got it yet.
Yeah, we're still waiting. They had to reprint.
Oh, okay, apologies.
And Chair, point of order, we've had a mover who hasn't had the opportunity to speak yet.
I'll reserve that.
Well, I think Tanya was just saying that rather than get debate, she wanted to have
Just want to put it out.
just to put it out there and just
Like to read it
explain. Just explain what it is before we get into debate, and I'm really happy with that. So I'd like to hear the background to it.
Thank you, Deputy Chair.
So I think we've got Billy here because he might be able to jump in and explain a couple of the proposed amendments. But essentially, the key amendment that we want to see to the plan before it is notified is the limit. So you'll see in Table A, we would like the limit to be changed to 80 cubics, or however you say it. There's a couple of other amendments there, Billy. I might just need you to remind me. I'm not sure I've got the right reference here, but the second bullet point is amend rule tank 9 to delete.
That's correct. So tank 9 at the current point in time, I suspect it might be a drafting omission, but it refers to stream flow maintenance and provides a direct exception for stream flow maintenance to abstract water over and above, I was going to say a limit, but there isn't one, over and above what the existing resource consents would otherwise have.
Yep.
So you're offsetting your stream flow by abstracting more water, which seems quite perverse.
Yeah,
So
so we.
that's certainly not the policy intent. We discussed that this morning. I thought it was abundantly clear that it does have to come from within the actual and reasonable use of a consent.
And we thought so too.
Yeah.
But that might just be a drafting error because it still says stream flow enhancement.
Right.
Which is not stream flow maintenance. It is more
We
than
can
just-
debate the technique of that, Mary Ann, but I think that if the deletion's the deletion, it's a deletion. If not, then we need to discuss whether or not we should be restricting more water than the non-limit.
Yeah, so that was the bullet point 2. And bullet point 3 actually related to the Section 32 report. And that was really to expand on the explanation we gave this morning when we were talking to Phil about wanting to make sure that values, etc.
Yes, and
are contained in there.
for the purposes of this committee, I spoke with Phil over lunch and we will be including a new section 4.6 into the section 32 to cover out those points.
So, in other words, to circle it back, we're looking to notify on the basis of amending the limit to 80 and subject to their discussion, bullet point 2 about deleting stream flow enhancement as being the 2 key amendments that we would need prior to notifying this. Otherwise, the Tangata Whenua are prepared to notify.
Chair, before we get into discussion, I think, subject to staff indicating otherwise, I think we would be comfortable with what has been proposed here with 2 exceptions. One would be there obviously does need to be some further discussion around the 80 million cubic metres, and we've had some of that already, so that's not something we would necessarily recommend to the committee be adopted, but that is obviously for the committee to resolve. And then with respect to the Schedule 1 planning process, it certainly would be our preference if that issue was dealt subsequently. There is a separate paper on that, and we would like to be able to have a proper discussion about the plan track, if you like. So we'd prefer to take that separately if we could.
And I think that doesn't detract from where we're going, but I think it was fair to let you know where we're going.
Okay.
So did I just get this thing about the stream flow enhancement? Because there's 3 points Tanya made. Notify, which I agree with James, we should deal with after we've decided what we're going to decide, how we're going to process it, sensible. The limit, how the limit's expressed, And the thirdly is about the stream flow enhancement. And I was getting the impression from you, James, and the staff, that this is not an issue. This is simply a matter of presentation, the way it's been expressed. Is that?
There is something I need to clarify here, because certainly with respect to the streamflow maintenance, so that's the offset required by groundwater abstractors in order to continue water take once we get to low flows. So the policy intent very much with respect to that is that the water needs to be taken from their actual and reasonable allocation. They can't apply for additional water to offset the effects of their take. However, it's possible that what Marianne had in mind here is another provision and related to enhancement, which would be if somebody came along and over on top of that came up with a proposal to actually not just maintain and offset, but to enhance, that they would be able to apply for a consent to take water to enhance the flow in some schemes.
And not necessarily just in the Heritonga Plains. This might apply elsewhere as well.
Anywhere within the tank catchment. So that's a different policy provision. If that gives rise to anxiety, I mean, Billy's expressed, the limit's the limit, in so much as the limit being the actual and reasonable use of all existing takes.
Can I just get this conceptually in my head? So you're going to enhance. So I'm just saying, for the way I would see it, someone's got some means over here and they've captured high flow, high rain areas, some water, and then when we get to no rain, dry, they're going to release that water into the stream to enhance it, and then be able to do something with it there. Is that what you're talking about?
That sort of scenario.
If I can respond to that, that requires some significant clarification in the policy framework and also in that terminology, because it's not clear.
Can I just ask a question, Chair, of clarification? By crossing out stream flow enhancement, you're proposing there is no stream augmentation at all?
No, it's just in that one provision, we thought it was an error and shouldn't be there. So if we turn to, Billy, have you got the copy of the plan in front of you?
No, I don't.
Yeah, I've got it.
But to answer your question, Councillor Law, the rule Tank 9 currently provides an exception for stream flow enhancement. My understanding was that is a carryover from when it was previously called stream flow enhancement. They had a definition beside it. The current period of time has gone on since when that was drafted. It's now called stream flow maintenance and enhancement, habitat enhancement. So that there's a problem with terminology. I'm not the smartest planner in the world. I'm pretty confident a very smart planner could come along, given you've got a prohibited activity standard notwithstanding that, and could apply for more water to be abstracted from potentially the Heritonga aquifer to provide an offset as stream flow enhancement. So whilst you think you're capping it, you may not be.
Yeah.
And
I don't think that was the intention.
It's certainly not the intent, and look, this can either be an issue that we just take off the table because it's just too untidy, or we leave it in and it will get resolved through the submissions and hearings process.
Our request is it comes out.
Can I suggest one other option? Tony will have seen this process before. We get things that you put a square bracket around this, subject to clarifying later. So it's in the...
Just take it out is easier.
Well, I think what Billy's expressed is I don't think as a committee we were expecting that that was a method that could be employed over and above actual and reasonable limits, for want of a better word. So unless someone's now suggesting this is something that is an exception, then it should come out. As James, you said, it might be a drafting thing. So we just want to be clear.
Yep.
So we would prefer it's taken out so we are clear.
So, Marianne, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's a nice to have, not a must have.
It's a nice to have, not a...
And so we
take
for
it out.
clarity, let's drop it out.
Okay, thank you.
But if we want to, we can circle back to it later if we get clarified.
Submissions.
Well, certainly through the submission process, yes.
Neil's been waiting.
I just want to be clear on that, because I'm sure Mana Pereri will be significantly concerned, for example, if we can't essentially flush urban streams by flows from the aquifer to clean those streams and protect the estuary. So is it enabling those practices which have been used before to use aquifer water times of zero flow in, for example, the plantation drain, to clean the drain.
So without it, we will have no ability to issue consents on that basis. And the example which we discussed earlier this morning, as I was getting my head around this, is the well that's been put down near the new Waitangi wetland,
yes.
Where we're taking groundwater specifically for the purposes of re-establishing wetlands. So we're providing a flow enhancement, but that is still taking water from the aquifer. So given the concerns,
are you saying, is there a provision to enable that if we remove this?
No, there won't be.
No, but not unless the consent actually exists right now, because then it is subject to being reapplied for. So if it's a city council resource consent that's utilised to extract water...
You're shooting yourself in the foot. Shooting yourselves in the foot. We're trying to mitigate, remedy, and here one of the most obvious opportunities is being taken off the table. Why would we do that if we've got an enhancement opportunity by using the aquifer? I mean, remember, we're at the end of it here in Napier City. We could almost feed it by hose across to the ocean. We've got an opportunity to mitigate problems with the estuary, and you're proposing here to take it off the table.
Can I suggest, Councillor Curtin, it's not that they want to stop that sort of thing happening, it's just that the way that it's worded in the plan is ambiguous and it could well have unintended consequences to the adverse. So it seems to me like Billy's suggestion was that it gets reworded to make it very clear that that's actually the case. But
so is that what we're intending here, is to reword to clarify? Is that the intention?
If the intention of council staff is to clarify the wording so that it might have meaningful effect outside the aquifer, then that's one option. If the committee deems it appropriate to have a non-numerical limit, reconsent all the existing takes, so grandparent them in for 10 years, and then allow people to come along and extract further water out of an unknown quantity, well, that's a committee decision, not mine.
So this is a proposal, the stream flow enhancement is over and above. It's an exception to
correct.
the actual and reasonable. It's an exception to...
That is the way I read it in the plan.
Yes.
And that was the intent.
Are there any more
For
questions?
enhancement
Are there any more
purposes.
questions that are specific to this? You moved it. Who's your seconder? Do you have a seconder? Api's the seconder.
So then...
Are there any more questions?
Sorry, Chair, I just want to wrestle this last one to the ground because I'm not sure that we actually have a landing point on it. I think if there is comfort with the notion that some sort of mechanism could be appropriate for the purposes that Councillor Curtin's just articulated, then we can leave it in, and then the submissions process and the hearings will work out if it is creating a loophole and it's some unintended consequence, then we can work that through. If there's discomfort with it as a proposition, then just deleting it at this point is probably the sensible thing to do. And again, it can be advocated for as a provision through submissions to the hearings process.
Correct, the latter.
I concur with that.
The latter's what I heard.
Yep.
Okay.
Are there any more questions? We have a move and a second. Sorry, do you wish to speak first, Tanya, or you've already spoken?
I've spoken, it's on the paper.
Do we have any speakers?
Yes, I have already spoken. Thank you.
Api, do you wish to speak?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Speakers to this amendment.
Well, the
I just need some...
amendment as it's sitting there, if it scrolled up a bit further, yeah, it does include these issues that I thought we were going to divide, 1.5, so those need to be taken back out.
Yeah.
And so the only issue of contention, once those are taken out, would be the 80.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, that's not my only one. No, that's not. There's several.
Sorry, so Tanya, can we just clarify that the mover, Tanya, you are moving what you've tabled here, 1.1 to 1.3 and 2.1 to 2.3, not 1.4 to 1.6.
Correct at this point, yes.
Yeah, okay.
So we're taking out the ones that relate to the process
1.4
post-notification.
to 1.6.
So thank you, Tom, yes.
Those two we're going to deal with separately.
Yeah.
When are we going to deal with
when we get to the next item on the agenda.
Okay.
So could I suggest, Chair, just I'm sensing some agitation down this end of the table here to my right. I just think it would be, to be fair to everybody, for the mover and the seconder of the substantive motion to speak, so they've got their perspective on. You've heard the amendment, mover of the amendment, speak. the second of the amendment can speak. I think we just have a general discussion. We're down to one issue with 3 options now, which is the key to it, I think, and then we're ready to make a decision.
I think that's probably fair analysis. Alan, do you wish to speak to the amendments to your...
I won't be here, but I hope in the future when you've got something like this, that the agenda will list specifically the items that you want a decision on, and then you deal with them one at a time and either pass them, not pass them, or amend them, and you'll come to some sensible conclusion. But I'm sorry, what we've got in front of us at the moment is a bit of a mess. However, I've got no basic objection to that other than the 80, and I couldn't support it for that. If it has to be a fixed number, as far as I'm concerned, it's got to go to 90, but I believe the alternative of no fixed measure is the best one, combined with prohibition.
Thank you. Mike, you seconded, didn't you?
Yeah, Mike did.
Yeah, I agree with Alan. And just in regards to the 80, I think by leaving non-specific, we actually can have a side note for the reasons for not having it. And that would explain, and just not boxing ourselves into a corner, which at some future time we may regret.
Thank you, Mike. Any other speaker? Tanya?
Just an amendment there. I think we've got an error here. So in 1.2, I think it should say agrees to the amendment set out in Table A, tabled by the Tangata Whenua, to be incorporated in the draft plan change version 9.3, and delete the square brackets, and to be incorporated into the Section 32 report, because one of those amendments relates to the Section 32 report.
Can I just understand whether the Table A you refer to, which is the document you tabled,
Yeah.
is an amendment to Table 1, which is in the paper, or are they two separate things, two separate tables?
The Table A here is amend policy, blah, blah, blah,
Yes.
amend rule, and amend this table in the Section 32
Are
report.
they amendments to this, which is Table 1?
No, they're amendments to the actual plan.
Right, okay. Yeah. So the motion that's been put forward by Councillor Dick is actually to agree to the amendments in Table 1, not Table A?
So the further deficiency, arguably, of this resolution is that it does not include those amendments.
No, we were just sort of mirroring the recommendation that was already given.
Right. So your version of this would be to agree to the amendments in Table 1,
Subject to
subject to amendments
80.
in Table A,
Yes,
tabled by Tangata Whenua.
yes, and one of them relates to the Section 32 report, which Table 1 doesn't deal with, right?
Yeah.
So Table 1, Annalene?
Yeah.
I'm going to say 4, isn't it?
Yeah.
So are you seeking comments on, at this point, on Alan's motion or Tanya's?
Tanya's motion.
Tanya's motion.
This is Tanya's motion, and her seconder is RB, and whether we're going to support it or not, her amendments.
Can it be clear for the typist, please?
Is it correct?
Agree to the amendment set out in Table 1.
And as amended by Table B,
A.
it's further amended. Sorry,
A.
Table A, tabled by Tangata Whenua.
Yep.
Say as further amended?
Yeah, flabbergasted actually. Gone through
So the only thing here, Chair, is that normally there's a clear motion sets down, and there's a clear amendment. And you can see the amendment with clarity. At the moment, I can't see the amendment with clarity.
Oh, so you want it marked up?
I want to be able to see the amendment, so
You
if
just
it fails,
underline
I
it.
want to be
Be
able to...
clear on the bit of paper.
Yeah, but
No, it's okay. So we're talking about this one. Can you just show it as a marked up, because there's Councillor...
While she's doing that, is there any
Farquharson.
other speakers?
Yeah.
Toto, sorry.
Looking for this one?
I'll come.
Yeah, I want to speak in support of the limit. I have in the past spoken about its culture of abuse of water, and I've observed it on many occasions. I've got a property out at Tarnwell where I grow maize. I don't put water on it, but I see the guy up the road a bit, he's got that hose going all the time, and he's trying to accumulate a property right. I go the other way and I see it raining, and they've got the sprinklers going in the orchard. So we've got a problem with water in this region. We have to send a clear message out that we are going to regulate to try and encourage a wiser use of water. And given we don't have definite data in terms of what the actual requirement is, I would say that 80 would be a good starting point. And if it is indicated that that there's a problem there, then we need to get people to change their land uses.
Tom, I saw you first, but I think, and then Peter.
Yeah, I just, a question, if I speak to this motion, do I give up my opportunity to speak to
No, you definitely
Alan's
don't.
motion?
No, we'll go back with it.
So I get to speak twice?
You do.
All I want to indicate at this point is I will be voting against this motion.
Thank you. Peter?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll also be voting against this motion. Given that we're all agreed that the management regime is actual and reasonable, why would you put a number there to confuse things? And I'm imagining a situation, if it's 80, that we go through this 10-year review of all the consents and we get to year 7 and we're already at 80. So what happens to the rest of the people who have got consents that are, do they get nil consents? It just creates a real problem both now and in the future. So I just don't think it's a good idea to put a number there at all.
Well, Mr. Chair, I can appreciate where the members are coming from. I totally understand the sentiments. Unfortunately, the number that Mr. Brough and co have put in front of you, and you've heard him try and explain his position, and he couldn't. He didn't. He said it's a better number than 90, or it's a lower number than 90. Well, that's obvious. There's no science that stands up to rigour around 90, even less around 80. It makes no sense to adopt something, and I see Mr. Brough signalling in that direction. It's not he that would be in front of the Environment Court having to explain the rationale and logic for 90. Already he'd failed to do so here. It would be the chief executive of the council would have to stand there and say, this is our logic, because there will be folk when the taps are turned off to say, what on earth is the council doing imposing an 80 regime, which makes no logical sense. What we've got in the 34B is a complete regime that of known measures to manage the water, and that includes avoiding any over-allocation, new consents. All of those matters are covered in that regime. It makes no sense whatsoever to now impose on top of it an unknown which will complicate the situation so much further. So I just can't support a scenario that's not backed by at least a modicum of rational logic, and that's why I say that the only logical way of addressing this management at this stage is to take a fair and reasonable approach until we know more. There's simply no room to be putting a figure such as 80 or 90 into the regime when it's so uncertain. It makes no sense and will be contested and challenged in court should we attempt to do so.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Paul?
Thank you, Chair. I find it quite remarkable that we can not take the precautionary approach with this. As Peter has set out, what happens if we get to year 6 and we find that we're getting close to the 80? Well, I take, that's a good point, but I take the view that what happens if we get to year 10 and find that we've allocated 150 million cubes and that the aquifer has now been mined. I also take the view that if we wish to actually get this thing through and notified through this committee, and it's properly formally constituted, and in the way it's set out in the Act, at the end of the day, we have to agree by the 80% vote to get it through. We can't, if we don't agree on this, if we can't come to some agreement on this particular issue, then it's just going to sit in the infinite loop again. I also think that if we were to put, if we were to put the 80 million cubes in there, and I think the 80 million cubes is perhaps a number which is a little ambitious, and I would have been much more comfortable with the 90, which is apparently defendable because that was originally put in draft whatever it was. Then it can all come out, there can be submissions made where we're told all the time that if we're not happy with something we can make a submission, or whatever. Well, the opposite applies as well. If someone's not happy with a value or a volume limit being put on it, well then they can make a submission and let the plingin commissioners decide as to which is the best approach. At the end of the day, let's just get this damn thing through and in front of the regional council one way or the other.
Thank you, Paul. Is there any other speakers before I return to Tanya? I want to speak before we go to Tanya. Why would you put the jobs and the futures of people in Hiratonga at risk with a number you don't know anything about? It's just made up. The 90, which I objected to months ago, some of you will recall, was done on some people having telemetry and others a reasonable guess. Sometimes I think, and Paul, you need to think about this very carefully, what you just said. Sometimes I wonder whether the people around this table are worried about the people, the truck drivers and the people out there who have jobs and who depend and trying to pay their damn mortgages and trying to just get on with life. And we're making huge decisions here which will impact on their life. Now, those same people, they do want clean streams, they do want clean rivers. That's the top of their priority. But they don't want to lose their jobs and they don't want to lose their futures. And this committee is about creating future for the environment of Hiratonga, and the environment includes the social and economic well-being of the people that live there. And I think that this is forgotten, and I will definitely be voting against this. Over to you, Tanya. No, blatantly got your hand up.
I'm allowed to listen
floor
to
is yours.
Mate, I just want to say that this is a really interesting conversation, and the thing that really I get out of this is that the people who are here all want the same thing: preserve the aquifer, preserve jobs, to make sure that we have the best future we can. What we differ on is the means by which doing it. And the problem we've got is we just don't have sufficient information to be as accurate as we would like. That's the problem. The interesting thing is, better information is on the way in terms of the SkyTem review that's going on. I would say in the very near future we will have a much better idea, but we don't today. I don't accept the proposition put forward that on the current track, with actual and reasonable, we could wind up with 150 million cubes being allocated. I don't accept that. That's just not correct. What we do know is that on a really dry year, the best estimate we had, we got to 90. That's what we thought it was. That's the worst case. So anything that's beyond that is just inflating the figures unnecessarily. So I would be happy enough with a figure at 90, but what I am happy enough with is a figure which says actual and reasonable, with a clear intent to reducing and managing water usage. That's what I want. I want to preserve the aquifer in a way which I can sustain over a long period of time. And when we get better information, more than happy to have a hard figure at that point. But I don't think I'm in the position to put a figure on the deck and be able to say I can justify this.
Thanks. I'm just getting some counsel here. Thanks. Right, are you finished?
Could you just tell me what I said? It's all right, that's okay.
I always listen to your statement.
Sorry, no,
Nikki.
Tonight on TV.
Okay. I'm supporting the 80 mil because the modelling and the actual and reasonable was done in a drought year. So that was the figure they came up with, was 90. And so to me, on a normal year, it would be lower. And so I'm taking and supporting that precautionary figure of 80. Yeah, I'm not happy with not having a figure at all, because things change as we go along, attitudes change, and yes, we've got a long-term plan, but people change, and then views change. Growth is going to keep happening, and we have to put some limits out there that a target or an actual use limit, but we need to hold the degradation that we're doing now. So I'm for 80.
Any other speakers before I go back to Tanya?
Just one consideration, Mr. Chairman, is our obligation to, in terms of avoiding, remedying and mitigating. Okay, so a lot of the activities that are going on at the moment, they've killed off a lot of the mahinga kai areas of the Māori people. And given our income levels, on average, under 50% are under 24,000. Many of these families are reliant on being able to go out and get stuff from creeks, lakes, wherever. And Hawke's Bay's got a high level of child poverty. We have a 37% increase in suicides in Hawke's Bay this year. All this economic stuff is putting stress on people. So, you know, this being about jobs and whatever, I don't see this as affecting jobs. I mean, we just need to encourage better land use, and there's lots of crops you can use that don't actually, high value crops that don't actually require a lot of water, like avocados and the like. So we just need to get them to say, okay, we'll do that, but let's grow a bit of that as well. Save water.
Just to clarify, we're speaking to the resolution Tangata
You're the
Whenua
final
proposed.
speaker.
Okay.
You are the final speaker.
The weight of that. Look, it's really important that we remember, in response to what Councillor Graham has said, yes, jobs are important, but they're not the only thing that are important to Māori, and we've heard that time and time again. We're trying to take a balanced approach here. Jobs are important, environment's important. We've also been told that whatever we agree as a committee will go out for public submission. It strikes me that Tangata Whenua are signalling a precautionary approach. They prefer the lower limit, but again, just like if it was 90 or no numerical limit at all, it will be subject to public submission. Same, and same again. So on that basis, Tangata Whenua were comfortable with putting this forward, so recommend to everybody to vote in favour so that we can get this out there and on the road.
Okay, thank you. To be clear, we're just voting on the amendments as put out in the paper here.
It's on the board. So can we just, might be worthwhile because James has had a little replay of it, so it's all on one place.
That's 80 mil, and then the stream flow enhancement is gone.
Yep, and then the last bit relates to the Section 32 report. Just some wording for the 32 report, which we alluded to before.
Well, I think those are all three separate issues. You can't put all three together. I'd vote for two of them, but not one ballot.
Jesus.
Put the motion.
No, we've got a motion. Yeah. So all those in favour of the motion, I think we better raise our hands. All those against? Motion was lost. Okay,
We revert to the substantive.
so we revert to the substantive?
Back to the substantive one.
Well, Mr. Chairman, could I take opportunity to speak to the substantive motion
You
now?
certainly can.
Right.
So
First-
you were the mover and Mike's the seconder.
Yeah. First of all, what I want to say is that I believe the Tank Group has done an outstanding job, and Mary Ann, Siri and Tom have also done an excellent job. I've been critical here today. It's about the decision-making process, not the deliberative work and the structuring of a plan change for highly complex issue. And what I want to say is that we have a land-based economy, and that rural activities in the past have been largely unregulated. Now they are highly regulated. So if we get something through here today, then we've made a start, and it is perhaps just a start, but one that is of very real significance and can be built on from here. So I hope that this motion will have support.
Mike? Nathan? Okay, speakers. Tom. And then Neil.
So I've held my tongue pretty much today, but I'm going to take my full 5 minutes now.
Right, time them.
I think this is a extremely positive step change forward from a situation where we have today a basically built, unregulated environment. Our regional resource management plan has no water quality provisions in it to speak of, no water allocation limits to speak of. And in that context, what we've done, say some important things here. We've, first of all, 2 years ago, put a cap on new use, which effectively is saying no to intensification on the Haratunga Plains. We've now codified that in this plan change to give it legal standing. And so we've said basically no new use. And then we've applied basically a sinking lid to existing use, which will be ratcheted down, and we will have to see where that takes us. We did the first step because we were given enough evidence to say that the potential mining of the aquifer was a possibility. We were right at the threshold of that, and we felt we needed to take the precautionary step of halting new use of aquifer water. So that was I don't think we can underestimate the importance of what we've already done there. As for the rest of the plan, when we've had lots of discussion about 80, 90, et cetera, the rest of this plan does introduce a entire new suite of freshwater quality standards dealing with dissolved nitrogen, ammonia, water clarity, MCI, E. coli, nitrates, the whole 9 yards. It has requirements throughout it, which I'm not entirely happy with. I don't think anybody could expect to get everything they want out of this plan. I would like to see more in this plan with respect to water conservation, and particularly as that relates to residential use of water, municipal use of water. It's not there to the full extent of my satisfaction, but there are provisions in here in that direction. It sets ambitious targets for sediment reduction, which is possibly the biggest water quality issue that we have in the catchment. It creates an entire new source protection regime that will protect drinking water safety for our community. Has new stormwater controls. It has a stream augmentation scheme, which is, let's say, untested. It's modestly tested, but I understand the concerns that folks have, and If you have a plan that stops short of rolling back the economy of Hawke's Bay, then it would follow that you would treat stream augmentation as a Band-Aid. It's been called a Band-Aid, but I don't look at it that way. I think it has to be tested, and it will be tested at the expense of water users, not the ratepayer. We have prohibited damming on 2 major rivers and 4 of their tributaries. We've prohibited damming of those rivers. Huge step. We've put in a regime that will require farm management plans or collective plans and a structure that will expand those throughout the catchment that this plan applies to. And some of those are already up and functioning and producing results as we sit around and debate this plan. And we've done it to the best of our ability with the science at hand, coming from a place where 2 councils ago, the rule of thumb was, could I see my toes in the water? That's where we were 2 councils ago. So we're taking the biggest chunk of our region's economy, and we're finally applying some rules to it in terms of water use, and we're quibbling over whether we have 80 million as a number in the plan or not. Around this plan, this council has also taken steps to put $30 million against riparian planning. We've gotten, and erosion control, we've gotten $5 million from the government to supplement that. We've gotten $15 million from the government to look at water storage options that could be done on a small scale and would look, at least at first blush, to meet any shortfall issues we have in terms of new water needs in the region. So you put all of that together, and that's what this plan would accomplish for our region. And I appreciate some would like to go from 0 to 90. Usually I'm in that boat, race car, whatever you want to call it. But I think it's reasonable enough to put forward a plan that takes us from 0 to 75. I'm happy with a plan that takes us from 0 to 75. I think my constituents will be thrilled with a plan that takes us from 0 to 75, and that's why I'm supporting the plan as it's been recommended to us by the staff.
Thank you, Tom. 5 minutes, 31 seconds. Peter, can you do slightly better than that?
Thank you, Chair.
4 minutes and 30.
This decision we're making here today is the culmination of 6 or 7 years of work by an awful lot of people. Our staff, I think we need to pay tribute to them. They've done a fantastic job in trying circumstances at times, and a number of people who are gathered here today who deserve a lot of credit because they've put in a lot of their own time. They've done the hard yards on behalf of the community at large. Many of them are residents of my ward, and I pay tribute to the incredible work that they've done. I don't think anybody's ever tried such an ambitious undertaking with so many people to do a plan change, and it's a credit to them that they saw the whole thing through. And some of them did it unpaid, which is extraordinary. So well done. I also need to pay tribute to Tom in particular, who attended the vast majority of the meetings, and Peter Paku, who was at many of them as well. And you really had to be at the stakeholder meetings to understand the dynamics that took place and how people listened to each other. And then through the process of listening and hearing other people's views and ideas, you actually absorb them into your own. And there was a lot of give and take through that whole process that unless you were there watching it, you would not appreciate what was going on. And that can't be captured in a Section 32 report. And so it's a pretty special process for those people who were a part of it. And it's remarkable, really, when you consider the whole process, that we've really only come down to one issue, and it's number, no number, 90/80. So that's, I think probably that's a credit to the process that we've embarked upon since the draft came to us from the Tanks stakeholder group as well. So I'm going to support this. I think it's really important that we get this through and get it out for consultation. And as Tanya said before, this is not the end of the road. There's further consultation and decision making to be made before we actually have a plan that we can finalise. So, there may be further changes and there's opportunity to do that. So I want to thank all of those people involved in it.
Finn first, then back to you, Tanya.
Oh, just briefly, Chair, thank you. I'd actually like to thank Tangata Whenua for the involvement in this process to challenge some of the thinking and to actually exercise a different view at times, which is what this thing's all about. I mean, when this committee was set up, no one in their wildest dreams envisaged a process that would never be challenged from either side or any other member of our Hawke's Bay public. And to be fair, no matter which version of this recommendation went up, there would still be submissions to the consultation process from most people in this room. So, we've got to be clear on some of that stuff. So I take the time to thank Tangata Whenua members for pushing back on some stuff. What's wrong with that? I don't always agree with the co-chair's language at times, Mr. Waka, but I respect your right and ability to have your say, and long may that continue. And Tanya, you always come in with a view, and you're very articulate, and you do your research and you do your homework, and long may that continue. So, whatever version went up today would have some challenge against it from people in the room. Where we are now, let's push the button on this thing. Let's get it out to the Hawke's Bay community. And for Christ's sake, let's get out of the tank catchment and get up to Wairoa where the action is.
Thank you, Finn. Tanya.
I request a caucus. Is that possible for 5 minutes?
I think given the... yes, exactly. We'll have a cup of tea. So we'll stop for a cup of tea.
Can I have a quorum?
Well, the problem you've got then is quorum.
No, but...
but people indicated they're going to leave.
We're okay with 3 people leaving and we'll still have quorum. So there's 17 currently, quorum's 14.
I heard one person say they needed to leave at 3.
Can I suggest just 5 minutes and we're back?
Yeah, 5 minutes.
It would be useful to have just a discussion amongst councillors as well at the same time.
Because then we've got another resolution part to deal with on process from here going. And I'm just conscious of time.
Yep, understand.
Haven't heard 3 minutes. We'll still have the opportunity to speak.
Yeah.
Yes, no, we're still on speaking, so it's a bit unconventional.
Can we meet in the councillors' room?
Sure.
No.
I wasn't asking. I was actually. That was a